Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Ewers.
And I'm Erik Ewers.
We are the directors of the upcoming PBS series on Henry David Thoreau. And tonight we are very excited to be speaking with one of the people featured in the film, Pico Iyer, a celebrated author of 15 books, most recently A Flame, Learning from Silence. He's been a contributor for more than 30 years to Time, the New York Times, Harper's Magazine, and the Los Angeles Times, among others. His 4 recent TED Talks have received more than 11 million views. And tonight, he is joining us from Japan.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here and so honored to be part of your film.
Well, we're honored to have you. We'll start by watching a short clip from our upcoming Henry David Thoreau film. This clip is from the second episode in the series and begins with an excerpt from Thoreau's Walden on why he went to the woods. Thoreau is voiced by the actor Jeff Goldblum. Let's play the clip.
I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived.
We all get lost in the challenges of everyday life. And our world has been set up to help you do that. As I understand it, the root of deliberate is from freedom. And it's to do something because you choose to, not because fate dictates it.
On some days, he simply chose to do nothing.
There were times when I could not afford to sacrifice the bloom of the present moment to any work, whether of the head or hands. Sometimes, having taken my accustomed bath, I sat in my sunny doorway from sunrise till noon, wrapped in a reverie, amidst the pines and hickories and sumacs, in undisturbed solitude and stillness, while the birds sang around or flitted noiseless through the house, until by the sun falling in at my west window, or the noise of some traveler's wagon on a distant highway, I was reminded of the lapse of time. I grew in those seasons like corn in the night, and they were far better than any work of the hands would have been.
He practiced doing nothing, which can be the hardest thing of all for many of us. He saw the beauty of sitting still, and he knew that if he just sat by his pond, reflecting in every sense of that word, he could find everything he needed.
He says that one of his job descriptions is to know the nick of time, to be able to notch it on his stick. He wants to be present. He gets down and on the ground to look at the battle of the black ants and the red ants at the pond. He goes into the shallows and he finds a way to pet fish. Try that sometime. You have to surrender to nature and nature's rhythms if you want to be whole. And you will see things you never saw before, and what you see will mean more than it ever did.
Love to start with your reactions to that clip and pick up on the idea of stillness and seeing, particularly for Thoreau at Walden Pond.
Well, I think it's only when you're sitting still that you can be moved. And it's only when you're sitting still you can really see the world clearly. And the more the world grows fast and furious, I think the more urgent it is to slow down, to step back, and to be deliberate, to deliberate. I think our challenge nowadays is that there are 1,000 things coming in on us every minute, and we can't really see what matters. What is a good life? What does success mean? And I remember just actually 3 years ago, the US Department of Labor sent out a survey, and 79% of respondents, more than 3 in every 4, said they never had a moment to rest or to think. And if we're unrested and thoughtless, I don't think we can make very clear and constructive decisions. So when I hear those beautiful words, one thing I love is the notion of deliberating, being deliberate. Another is that thought of fronting the world, confronting it head on, not through a screen. And the third thing I love is just that sense of addressing what is really essential. And maybe I could say also in a more personal vein, I first began to read Thoreau when I was 21, when I was living in Boston, so 20 or 30 minutes from Concord and Walden Pond. And a few years later, I had this wonderful job in Midtown Manhattan with a 25th floor office and apartment on Park Avenue and a bottomless expense account. So just the life I might have dreamed of as a little boy. But I kept on remembering Thoreau saying he didn't want to die, feeling he'd never lived. And so actually when I was 29, I threw over my dream job. I moved to a single room on the back streets of Kyoto, Japan, where I didn't have a telephone, I didn't have a toilet of my own, I didn't really have a bed, but every day lasted 100 hours, and every trip down the street was an adventure, an awakening to the kind of miracle of the everyday. And now, 38 years later, I live not so far from that little room, in 2 rooms now. But I think it was Thoreau who taught me that a relatively simple and undistracted life can be the most luxurious of all.
That's beautiful. It's amazing that you moved to Kyoto, Japan, and pursued a life like Thoreau did. One of my favorite things in the film is how you mentioned that doing nothing is actually difficult. And I just think that is, revelational. And can you tell me a bit about what you meant? And, was Thoreau really trying to reference Buddhism? Or was his insight uniquely personal, perhaps an American response to the world around him?
I think Thoreau was a great American revolutionary, and he was essentially fashioning his own Declaration of Independence. So it's no surprise he went to Walden Pond on the 4th of July. But part of being an American is drawing from the wisdom of every other tradition. And I think Thoreau, more than any American writer I know, was eager to learn from the great thinkers of Persia and China and India. So you're right, he did oversee the first translation into English of a great Buddhist text, the Lotus Sutra. But I don't think he was consciously reflecting Buddhism. I think it's more that anybody who sits still across any continent and in any century comes to the same understanding. He independently found what the great thinkers of other traditions had discovered too. And I love the beginning of your question, because I think all of us know that at some level, it's only by doing nothing that we can do anything worthwhile at all. I've been a full-time writer for 40 years, and it took me a while to realize that my best writing was done not when I was hovering over my notes on my desk, but when I was taking a walk, or when I was lying down, or when I was playing tennis. And it's in those spaces, when your mind is relatively open, that much more interesting things can come. It's on the margins of life, as Thoreau always said, that something fresh arises. And again, even 100 years ago, the great financier, J.P. Morgan, was giving himself 2 months off every year. And he said wonderfully he could never achieve in 12 months what he achieved in 10 months. And that was true in the 1920s, but now it's much truer. And I think that's why so many companies are talking about 35-hour weeks or 4-day weeks. Many companies give their workers 20% off because they know the more they give people time to do nothing, the better will be the results that they bring back. So I think Thoreau essentially was, as you said, very personal and very American. But that's how, let's say, he inspired Mahatma Gandhi in terms of the notion of nonviolent resistance. Gandhi called his autobiography The Story of My Experiments with Truth, which is almost a perfect Thoreauvian sentence. And I think that's how, by being American, Thoreau inspires somebody like me, a British-born person living in Japan. I should probably tell you the coolest cafe down the street in Kyoto, Japan is called Walden Woods.
So, Pico, there's of course this misconception, right, that Thoreau went to the woods to distance himself from the world, right, to sort of escape from society. And that he was completely alone there, neither of which is true. We know that he frequently went to Concord to gossip and to read the newspaper, etc. Talk about his connection to community and some of your own experiences with solitude and community at the Benedictine Hermitage, which you explore in your book, Aflame.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think it's really important to remember, as your film shows, that the very first lecture Thoreau delivered at the Concord Lyceum was not on solitude. It was on society. That was its theme. And I think two of the central lines in Walden are when he says, I think I love society as much as most, and when he says, I am naturally no hermit. So, as you say, people sometimes say, well, Thoreau was a hypocrite while he was staying at Walden Pond to go and have dinner at his mother's house on Sundays and to entertain friends on Saturdays in his cabin. But I think that was the whole point of the enterprise. In other words, he went to Walden Pond to see how he could become a better neighbor, a better citizen, and a better friend. I think he says somewhere that I have no private good unless it be my particular attempt to serve the public. And so that's why around Concord, he was helping people repair their ovens. He was painting their houses. He was advising them on how to grow their beans. When Emerson was on tour, Thoreau would look after Emerson's wife and children for 10 straight months. He would hold melon parties every year, famously. So I think everything he was doing was with a view to helping the community more. And of course, Emerson beautifully wrote about the value of self-reliance, listening to the divinity within, finding your own way. But Thoreau actually lived those out. And we have many philosophers who tell us how to live. But I think the particular beauty and blessing of Thoreau is he showed us how we could live, beginning with this very practical, a long chapter on economy. So you're right, I've been lucky enough to make more than 100 retreats over 34 years with a group of Benedictine monks in California, even though I'm not a Christian. And when I first arrived there, I have this beautiful room overlooking the Pacific Ocean. I'm free to do anything at all or nothing, beholden to nobody. So I thought, what a wonderful liberation I'm getting through solitude. But the longer I stayed there and the more I kept returning, the more I realized that solitude was only really a gateway to a richer sense of community and a deeper understanding of compassion. Because, of course, my monk friends are meditating for 4 hours or praying for 4 hours every day, but that's only so they can be of greater service to their community, to guests like myself, and to the world. I remember when I first went there, I had a friend who said, Pico, isn't it kind of selfish of you to leave your friends and family behind and go for 3 days on retreat? And I said to her, maybe not, if this is the only way I can learn to be a little more selfless. This is how I can try and cut through the selfishness that might otherwise be my default response. And I think that's what people might have said to Thoreau, and maybe that's the answer he would have given. And it's important to remember, people often forget, only 2 of his 44 years were spent at the cabin in Walden, and he left that cabin and that experiment when he was 30, really so that he could be an essential member of his community.
It's amazing. He's such a forward thinker, really happily stepping out of his own time in some ways, and the notion of being an individual. And the thing that blows my mind the most about him is how far ahead of time he was. He saw a lot that was going on in his own time period, but he also knew where it was heading. And, his thinking about environmental concerns and the distractions we have in society, politics, the busyness and hectic nature of our own lives were swept up in the current of obligation. How do you feel about his thinking about those kind of things and how urgent they are in today's society now in 2026?
I love what you just said. And when you were talking about busyness, I was thinking that at some level, we all know that people who are too busy are seldom very wise. And people who are wise are seldom too busy. But we forget that, and we get caught in this vicious cycle whereby we're in such a hurry we forget what a hurry we're in. And Thoreau was a kind of alarm clock waking us up. So yes, when you speak of distraction, I think many times of how he's told us that the man whose horse trots 100 miles a minute does not carry the the most important news. And that, again, he was always trying to remind us, as you said, to look beyond yesterday's problems to next year's possibilities. And I think that becomes very urgent now, because I notice so many of my friends are caught up in what happened 6 minutes ago or 6 days ago, that they can't see the larger arc of history. So I've noticed many of my friends now are more despairing and more anxious than they've ever been. And if I look back on the last 60 years of my life, I am amazed at how much the world has moved forwards. Hundreds of millions of people have been raised out of poverty here in India and China and across the world. I think in the United States, the rights for women and people of color and people along the margins and the LGBT community have really improved. There's much still to be done. Technology has made our lives longer and healthier and more interesting. Here I am talking to you across 7,000 miles. I couldn't have imagined that when this century began. And I think if we get too caught up in what happened just a few hours ago, we fail to see the higher laws and the deeper consequences that, as you say, Thoreau, the great prophet, was always trying to remind us of. I've had the great advantage for 51 years of traveling constantly with the Dalai Lama, day after day, year after year. I'm by his side for 8 hours of his working day. And of course, people come up to him every day with heartrending questions. Your Holiness, I just lost my son. A tsunami just wiped out my town. Or I just received a terrible diagnosis. And he always looks at them with great compassion and sympathy. And he says, please try to take the wider perspective in time and space. Your predicament is terrible, but it's not the end of the story or the end of the world. And I think in some ways that wider perspective is what Thoreau was always trying to give us. And when you talk of conservation, again, I think like the Dalai Lama, he had a keen sense of how everything was interconnected, and the well-being of any individual depended on the welfare of everything, and that therefore we have to preserve the water, the air, the trees that are helping to preserve us. So I love the way that you point out that in some ways in 1850, he was the perfect diagnostician for what we're facing in the year 2026. Every now and then, if I'm tempted to look at my emails, say, I remember his saying, the man who goes to the post office too often is the poorest man of all. What gap is he trying to fill by seeing if he's getting a letter, or in my case, seeing if he's getting an email? And again, I love it when he says, we have become tools of our tools, because if that was true 170 years ago, it's probably truer now. And I think my feeling is humans were never designed to live at a pace determined by machines. And the only way we could do that is by becoming machines ourselves. And not even my friends in Silicon Valley would wish for that. So again, Thoreau saw the problems of a world, even though he couldn't have seen the details of the world we're inhabiting now.
Pico, I just have to say, I can listen to you talk for hours. It's just so calming, also incredibly insightful. I'm really enjoying this. Thank you for taking the time to do this. You have a wonderful quote at the end of the film, in a reflection on Thoreau's legacy today, and how, to this end, so many of us are disconnected, not only from each other, but from ourselves. And in the film you say, and I'm going to paraphrase, Thoreau was saying, if you're beginning to die within, take measures now. There must be some cabin in the woods within you, some place where you can regenerate. Tell us about the cabin in the woods within you and, sort of in your life.
I think it's the inner safety box where each of us keeps our treasures. You could say it's our inner savings account, where we keep everything maybe invisible and intangible that's the only thing that can sustain us. So I think my question of life, which is Thoreau's question too, is what do I have to bring to the ICU? Because the sad fact of it is that I, and probably many of the people I love, will find themselves at the emergency room. What do we have to bring to life's challenges? I remember actually once I was sitting in this apartment and the phone rang, and I suddenly heard that my mother, who was 83, had had a stroke and had been rushed into the hospital. I was her only living relative, so I flew over and I was by her side in the ICU for 35 days as she was trembling between life and death. And I quickly saw, well, my resume was no good at all. My bank account was of very limited use. all the books I've written, everything I've achieved in the world was beside the point. And I felt the only thing I could bring to my mother and to myself in that difficult situation was my inner resources. In other words, whatever I had gathered in that inner cabin, which is much more essential than the outer place that we inhabit. Again, 700 years ago, the great German philosopher Meister Eckhart wrote that as long as your inner work is strong, the outer will never be puny. Take care of the inner landscape. Then your relationships, your career, your understanding of yourself take care of themselves. But if you don't attend to the inner, you're like a car without an engine. You just can't go anywhere. And I think part of, again, the beauty of Thoreau was that he was always cultivating the inner garden, even as he was tending to his external garden. And he was always drawing our attention to the fundamental issue of what is going to support us in our time of need. And pointing out what, again, I think we all sense, but we sometimes forget, which is it's only by stepping away from our lives that we can begin to see them and see them in the correct proportion. And it's only by stepping away from the world that we can gather the resources that then allow us to contribute something to the world. And so I think Thoreau was always trying to remind us of our inner treasure, which has to do with remembering what we love, thinking about what really matters, and seeing what is going to support us and bring us joy in the long term. And I think I've found that the more I read Thoreau, the richer is my life, and I hope the richer is what I can offer to my friends and family.
Well, Pico, like Thoreau, you give us so much to think about, so much to contemplate. And the best part of your contribution to the film and to your own life and perhaps to ours is that you've lived it. You've experienced what Thoreau has experienced, and you've made it a part of your life. And I think that's one of the points in the film, is that we're trying to say to our viewers, stop, slow down, and find your own cabin in the woods and see if you can find your own experiment in life to determine what really makes you feel fulfilled and feel like you're living with purpose and meaning. And just to see you be such a perfect embodiment of that is just a wonderful, wonderful gift that you give, not only in the film, but to everyone who knows you. So thank you so much for being a part of this and for helping us think about our own lives.
Oh, thank you, Erik. That really means a lot. And thank you both for all that you put in over many years to make this such an inspiring film. And just as you say, I think Thoreau has inspired so many people, more than almost any writer I can think of, just by putting his ideas to the test and reminding us you can choose to live differently. And it's a choice any one of us can make any day of our life. So I'm very excited that the whole world gets to enjoy your film very soon.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
We are